Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are diving straight into a book that has really kind of stirred up the waters around one of the most infamous crime stories in American history,
Yeah.
and that's Tom O'Neill's Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the secret history of the 60s. And this deep dive is especially for you, our listener, who flagged this as something that we needed to explore. You were curious, and frankly, so were we, about what might be lurking,
Yeah.
beneath the surface of this Manson family narrative that we all think we know.
Yeah, what we have here are insights gleaned from O'Neill's incredibly extensive 2-decade-long investigation.
2 decades.
It began with what seemed like a relatively simple magazine assignment,
Right.
but it quickly spiraled into a far-reaching exploration of potential cover-ups and some truly unsettling connections that extend well beyond the confines of Spawn Ranch.
So our aim today is not to rehash the horrific details of the crimes themselves. Those are very well documented.
Yeah.
Instead, we want to unpack some of the most unexpected and frankly quite strange findings that emerged from O'Neill's years of digging. And we'll be focusing on details that seem to contradict the seemingly solid case laid out in Vincent Bugliosi's Helter Skelter, which for many, became the definitive account of these events. And we're hoping to offer you a richer, more complex, and perhaps even a more unsettling understanding of this dark period.
For those of you who know the story, Helter Skelter uh, really became the widely accepted narrative.
It really did.
So let's trace O'Neill's initial steps.
Right.
He was approached by Premiere Magazine and asked to examine why Charles Manson and the family continued to hold such a prominent place in our cultural consciousness,
Yeah.
even decades after their terrible acts.
Right. And like many people, O'Neill's starting point was Helter Skelter.
Right.
And he described it as a very powerful, absorbing book that really cemented the prevailing view of Manson as this incredibly manipulative cult leader
Right.
in the family, as this group who had completely abandoned, mainstream morality and were utterly under his control.
Yeah, and Helter Skelter provides a chillingly detailed account of the Tate and LaBianca murders on the night of August 8th, 1969. Sharon Tate, who was pregnant, along with Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Stephen Parent,
Wow, you really know these names.
who were brutally murdered at Tate's home on Cielo Drive.
Yeah.
The following night, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca suffered a similar fate. Gruesome messages written in blood, including a misspelling of Helter Skelter, along with Rise and Death to Pigs, were found at both locations.
Yeah, it's just even hearing you say that, it's just such a disturbing and dark story.
Absolutely.
And the motive that Helter Skelter so powerfully presented, the one that really stuck in the public imagination, was Manson's utterly bizarre belief in an imminent race war he called Helter Skelter,
Right.
supposedly triggered by his interpretation of the Beatles' music.
But as O'Neill immersed himself in this case, spending 2 decades on his investigation, he began to seriously question the completeness and potentially even the fundamental accuracy of that official explanation.
Yeah, 20 years, that's a huge commitment to a project like this.
It really is what began as a magazine article, transformed into an almost obsessive quest to uncover what he felt was missing from the established narrative.
Right, and it wasn't just O'Neill who felt this way. He highlights a very different perspective from Mike McGann, a lead investigator in the murder of Gary Hinman, which happened just before the Tate LaBianca killings.
Yes.
McGann, according to O'Neill, believed that everything in Vince Bugliosi's book is wrong.
That's a pretty definitive statement.
It's a very definitive statement. So O'Neill also draws attention to the initial police reports regarding the Tate murders.
Right.
These early reports focused on the possibility of a vengeful massacre orchestrated by two individuals, Billy Doyle and Charles Taco.
Yeah.
These initial leads seem to point towards a completely different motivation, one that had no connection to Manson's helter-skelter theory, which makes you wonder why that initial line of inquiry seems to have been downplayed or ultimately dismissed by the prosecution in favor of the helter-skelter motive. It certainly suggests that the official story we've all heard might not be the full picture.
Or even the correct one.
Or even the correct one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the downplaying of those initial leads
Right.
naturally brings us to consider some of the more shadowy figures that emerged in O'Neill's investigation, individuals who might have been connected to those alternative theories.
This brings us to some of the most intriguing and often quite enigmatic individuals that O'Neill's research brought to light. These are people who appear to have been operating on the fringes of the Manson family and the subsequent investigations potentially with hidden agendas or connections.
Let's start with Charles Taco. He claimed to O'Neill that at the time of the murders, he was working for a clandestine intelligence agency. He wouldn't specify which one,
Right.
but that it reported to a man named Hank Fine.
Okay.
Taco further claimed that Fine, whose real name was Hirsch Matthias Warzetow, was a government assassin. Both Taco and Billy Doyle, who, as we mentioned, was also implicated in those early reports, identified themselves as second-generation intelligence.
That's quite a claim to unpack.
It is, and when O'Neill looked into Hank Fine, he discovered that he was indeed a veteran of the Army's Military Intelligence Service, or MIS, a highly secretive World War II operation.
And for our listeners, MIS stands for Military Intelligence Service, a very secretive branch.
Yeah.
This discovery does lend a certain degree of weight to Taco's otherwise rather extraordinary claims.
It really does. Then we have the murder of Gary Hinman. This often gets overshadowed by the more publicized Tate LaBianca killings.
Right.
But it occurred just prior and involved members of the Manson family.
Yeah.
Hinman was held captive and tortured for 2 days in an attempt to get money he was thought to have inherited. Manson himself reportedly cut Hinman's ear eventually. Manson instructed his followers via a phone call to kill Hinman, which Bobby Beausoleil ultimately did.
What's particularly noteworthy here is the timeline. Beausoleil was arrested for Hinman's murder on August 6th. Just 2 days later, the Tate murders took place. O'Neill points out that when Beausoleil called Spahn Ranch from jail, he informed Charlie about his arrest for killing Hinman. This raises a crucial question. If Manson was already aware that his followers had committed a violent murder, did that knowledge play a role in the subsequent Tate LaBianca killings in a way that hasn't been fully considered?
Wow, that's,
This timeline is crucial. It suggests that the violence within Manson's group was escalating independently of the Helter Skelter race war theory. Did the knowledge of Hinman's murder somehow precipitate or influence the subsequent more publicized killings?
wow.
O'Neill raises this as a significant point of contention with the official narrative.
It certainly complicates the idea of the Helter Skelter narrative being the sole driving force behind the later murders. Then we have the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department raid on Spahn Ranch shortly after the Tate LaBianca murders. Despite the discovery of stolen property and firearms, Manson himself was released. Preston Guillory, who participated in the raid, claimed that there was sufficient evidence to violate Manson's parole right then and there. So the question is, why wasn't he kept in custody?
So as we delve into the circumstances surrounding the Spahn Ranch raid, we have to ask ourselves, how does this apparent leniency impact our understanding of the accepted story?
That's a great question. We also learn about Kitty Lutzinger, a pregnant runaway who was living at Spahn Ranch and who provided police with significant information before the raid even took place. Her testimony corroborated the presence of drugs and weapons and the fact that many of the family members were runaways. This information was available to law enforcement before the full extent of the Tate LaBianca horrors was known.
Right.
And then we encounter Reeve Whitson. His involvement in the Manson investigation is particularly perplexing. He appears to have been on the scene right from the beginning, even before the identities of the killers were known. Multiple sources suggested to O'Neill that Whitson was working for an intelligence agency, possibly the CIA.
So as we delve into figures like Reeve Whitson, we have to ask ourselves, how does this potential intelligence involvement impact our understanding of the accepted story?
I mean, it really does make you wonder what's going on here.
This is where the narrative takes a truly unexpected turn. O'Neill presents evidence of Whitson's deep and early involvement, including LAPD records and the account of Sharon Tate's own father, all placing Whitson at the center of the investigation very early on. His ex-wife even confirmed to O'Neill that he had worked for the CIA, having been undercover as a journalist in the early 1960s.
Undercover as a journalist.
So what O'Neill uncovers here isn't just a quirky detail. The potential presence of a CIA operative at the very beginning of the Manson investigation fundamentally challenges the idea of a purely objective, crime-focused inquiry. It forces us to consider whether there were other agendas at play.
And Whitson's behavior was also quite unusual. He reportedly showed his gun to a witness and even attempted to pressure another witness, Hatami, by threatening him with deportation if he didn't corroborate seeing Manson at Tate's residence. This raises serious concerns about the reliability of the witness testimonies and whether there might have been an agenda beyond simply solving the murders.
Absolutely. And let's not overlook Terry Melcher, the Beach Boys producer who had significant interactions with Manson and the family.
Yeah.
He initially considered offering Manson a record deal.
Oh, really?
But ultimately decided against it. His accounts of his interactions with Manson seem inconsistent, particularly when he was under oath. It's just remarkable how many threads seem to deviate from the neatly tied up Helter Skelter narrative, isn't it?
It really is. And there's the detail about Tex Watson being ticketed while driving Melcher's car months before the murders. It suggests a closer relationship between Manson's inner circle and Melcher than Melcher seemed willing to acknowledge.
Right.
Adding another layer of intrigue is Manson's defense attorney, Irving Kenerick, who cryptically mentioned being paid by someone whose identity would be big news and a surprise. As O'Neill notes, some speculated that Melcher was the one providing the financial support.
These concealed connections and inconsistencies really begin to erode the straightforward narrative of a deranged cult leader and his brainwashed followers acting in isolation.
Right.
It opens up the possibility of external influences and motivations that were never fully explored or brought to light.
Shifting gears slightly, O'Neill delves into the extensive use of LSD within the Manson family and the various theories surrounding mind control. Manson himself was reportedly very skilled at creating a new reality for his followers. Through the use of psychedelic drugs like LSD, Dr. Joel Fort, who testified at the trial, even proposed that a school for crime fueled by LSD could potentially program individuals to commit murder.
What's particularly interesting in this context is the presence of Dr. Louis Jolyon Jolly West in the Haight-Ashbury district during this very period.
Hate!
Yeah, he claimed his research focused on psychedelic patterns, but he had a well-documented history with the CIA's incontra mind control program. Incontra was a highly controversial and clandestine program run by the CIA that explored various methods of mind control, including the use of psychedelic drugs and psychological manipulation. West's research interests included inducing temporary mental illness effects and model mental illnesses using LSD.
It's so disturbing to think that there are people out there who are, experimenting on others in this way and trying to control their minds through these means.
Absolutely. It's a very disturbing chapter in history.
The connections become even more intricate when we consider West's potential links to David Smith's Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, or HAFMC, and the possibility of CIA funding for the clinic. O'Neill even raises the possibility that Manson himself may have been one of David Smith's research subjects at the clinic.
And West's involvement doesn't end there. He was also involved with Jack Ruby Lee, Harvey Oswald's killer, after the Kennedy assassination, which raises unsettling questions about potential manipulation in another highly significant historical event. The timeline and West's known interests and affiliations certainly warrant further examination.
All of this, the inconsistencies, the shadowy figures, and the potential intelligence connections naturally leads to questions about a possible cover-up and hidden agendas. O'Neill explores the suggestion that Manson might have even been an informant for someone, possibly the FBI, given his documented fear of the Black Panthers.
Think of it this way. Even someone operating outside the law might find it advantageous to provide information to law enforcement if they feel threatened by a rival group, in this case the Black Panthers.
Yeah.
That's a startling proposition. The idea that someone as seemingly chaotic as Manson could have been providing information to law enforcement.
Right. O'Neill also details instances of potential evidence destruction or disappearance related to the case, which further fuels suspicion about a possible cover-up.
Right.
For example, the unusual way Susan Atkins's testimony was handled and the involvement of Lawrence Schiller in publishing her story raises some eyebrows. Schiller himself seemed to imply that the prosecution wasn't actively hindering his access to their key witness.
And Danny Bowser, a retired LAPD lieutenant from the Special Investigations Section, stated that the official homicide investigation report for the Tate case was littered with inaccuracies, even concerning seemingly straightforward details, like the timeline of evidence collection, such as the discovery of the victim's glasses.
If that's true, that's pretty significant.
It is.
Perhaps one of the most tangible outcomes of O'Neill's investigation was the reopening of the investigation into the death of Filippo Tenerelli in Bishop, California.
Right.
O'Neill's findings suggested that Tenerelli could have been another victim of the Manson family, and that his death, initially ruled a suicide, might have been part of a larger effort to conceal the full extent of their crimes.
The fact that law enforcement in Bishop decided to reopen this decades-old case based on O'Neill's research speaks volumes about the significant questions his book raises regarding the official narrative surrounding the Manson family's crimes and their true scope.
So as we bring this deep dive into Tom O'Neill's chaos to a close, we're left with a much more intricate and disturbing picture than the one that has been widely accepted for decades. We've encountered inconsistencies in the official accounts, potential concealed connections to intelligence agencies, and alternative motives that appear to have been deliberately overlooked. The seemingly simple story of Manson and his brainwashed followers acting on a bizarre racial ideology now seems incomplete, to say the very least.
Indeed, when you consider the evidence, O'Neill meticulously compiled the documented intelligence connections, the mind control research happening concurrently in the hate, and the numerous discrepancies in the official accounts. It really compels you to question the very nature of truth and how certain narratives become entrenched as historical fact. Especially during times of significant social upheaval, the comfortable explanation isn't always the complete one.
If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, and we certainly hope it has, we strongly encourage you to delve further into Tom O'Neill's Chaos. It's a detailed and at times challenging book, but it explores these complexities with a level of depth that we could only touch upon today.
It really is a fascinating read.
Yeah, what other questions does this case or the tumultuous era it represents raise for you? We'd be very interested to hear your thought. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
And perhaps this exploration might leave you pondering this, given the information O'Neill has brought to light. What does it suggest to you about how power structures and hidden agendas might influence the stories that become our accepted history? It's a thought worth considering.
It really is food for thought.
It is.
Okay, well, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, great show. Really creepy stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your mind around all of the complexities and the potential implications of what O'Neill uncovered.
Mm.
I think one of the things that struck me most was the idea that the official narrative, the one that we've all come to accept as truth, might be just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes you wonder, right, about how many other historical events might have these hidden layers, these untold stories that could completely change our understanding of what happened.
Absolutely. I think O'Neill's work serves as a powerful reminder to question everything, to dig deeper, and to be wary of accepting any single narrative as the absolute truth.
You know what I find really fascinating is the way O'Neill connects the dots between seemingly disparate events and individuals. It's like he's piecing together this massive jigsaw puzzle where the pieces don't quite fit, but they're close enough to suggest a much larger picture.
Yeah, it's like he's revealing a hidden tapestry, a network of connections that were deliberately obscured.
And the implications are huge. I mean, if what O'Neill suggests is even partially true, it means that we might be living in a world where powerful forces are manipulating events and shaping our perceptions of reality in ways we can't even begin to comprehend.
It's a sobering thought, and it certainly raises questions about the nature of truth itself and how easily it can be manipulated or suppressed.
I think it's also a reminder that we can't just passively consume information. We have to be critical thinkers, we have to question authority, and we have to be willing to dig deeper to uncover the hidden truths that might be lurking beneath the surface.
Absolutely well said, and I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Okay, yeah. Well, thanks again for joining me for this deep dive into chaos.
It's been a pleasure.
All right, take care.
You too.
Okay, bye.